Welcome to Oral Communication in Context, Quarter 1, Week 3, Strategies to Avoid Communication Breakdown. I am Mr. Nelpon Pisambalod and I am your teacher for this subject. The previous meeting, you were able to find out the models of communication. This time, let us find out what students need to know. This module was designed and written with you in mind. It is here to help you identify various strategies that could be used in order to avoid communication breakdown. It will lead you to understanding how communication works among people to foster mutual understanding and good relationship. The scope of this module permits it to be used in many different learning situations. The language used recognizes the diverse vocabulary levels of students. The lessons are arranged to follow the standard sequence of the course, but the order in which you read them can be changed to correspond with the textbook you are now using. Still on what students need to know, this module is divided into two lessons, namely Lesson 1, Communication Breakdown, Lesson 2, Various Strategies to Avoid Communication Breakdown. But of course, since it's Lesson 2, we'll have it next week. Then, after going through this module, you are expected to, number one, define the concept of communication breakdown, identify the different kinds of barriers to effective communication. 3. Explain the causes of communication breakdown. And 4. Use appropriate strategies to avoid communication breakdown and achieve the goals of relationship and community building. Let's now begin with Lesson 3, Communication Breakdown. In Module 2, you have learned about the models of communication. You have realized how the different elements of communication work together to achieve a successful communication transaction. Now, let us find out if you can still remember your previous lesson by answering the next activity. What's in? Directions. Put the phrases or statements in the correct column. Write the letter of your answer. So we have here the models of communication, linear model, interactive, transactional model. So we are going to categorize the given statements under each depending on where they belong, okay? So look at the statements. Letter A, Schramm model of communication. B, Shannon-Weaver model of communication. C, a two-way communication process where feedback is given after a message is sent. They show circular process between the sender and receiver. E, barrier affects the smooth flow of communication. F, a one-way communication process. G, having a job interview. H, reciting a poem in front of the class. I, presiding an important meeting. J, focusing on the message sent. So after I finish reading those phrases or statements, let us now classify them to what kind of model of communication they belong. So let's have it this way. Under linear model of communication, I do believe that you got them correctly. So we have letter B. Shannon-Weaver model of communication is the best representation for linear model of communication. Then we have letter F. It's a one-way communication process. That's the basic definition of linear model. Then we have also letter H. Reciting a poem in front of the class is a good example of a linear model of communication. And lastly, we have letter J, focusing on the message sent. Okay? It's letter J, focusing on the message sent. Because because the receiver of the message just needs to focus on the message given by the speaker. Okay? Just dealing with it alone. So let's have now the statements under interactive model of communication. So first, we have letter A, the Schramm model of communication. The Schramm model of communication is the best diagram that explains the interactive model of communication. We have letter E. Letter E. Barriers affect the smooth flow of communication. Yes, we have there the barrier, the noise, 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 if you can remember it correctly. Then we have letter C. A two-way communication process where feedback is given after a message is sent. What that feedback there makes it different from linear model of communication. Then we have letter G. Having a job interview is a good example of an interactive model of communication wherein the interviewee or the interviewer and the interviewee are exchanging ideas depending on the flow of the interview. Okay? So those are the answers under interactive model of communication. Let's now proceed to transactional model. So what are the remaining letters? We have letter what? Letter D. Okay, letter D is what? Shows circular process between the sender and receiver. That's why it's transactional model, okay? So you have the circular process. Next, we have letter E. Barriers also affect the flow of communication. It's also under transactional model. And letter I. Presiding an important meeting is under transactional models. Okay, let's continue. What's new? Communication is a process of exchanging thoughts, ideas, and opinions in order to connect with other people. Its goal is to achieve a clear and effective understanding resulting to good relationship in the community. However, there are times when this goal is not reached due to certain factors. When this happens, there is communication breakdown. So communication breakdown, as simple as what is said there, okay, is what? Is when a smooth sailing communication all of a sudden comes to an end because of a certain factor. Wherein maybe there's a certain barrier that stops the communication. And when it happens, you have the communication breakdown. Let's have this activity. Directions. Identify the reasons for the communication breakdown in each picture. Write your answer in a separate sheet of paper similar to the box below. So just have your answers in your mind. Yes. Try to connect with my answers, okay? And check as I go on explaining each picture, each image, if your answer is the same with mine, okay? Let's have the first image. What could be the reason for the communication breakdown? Maybe that guy doesn't understand whomever he's talking to because of the noise coming from the vehicles. Okay? Of course, it's kind of silly of him having conversation on top of an overpass, is it? So I have it there. Go somewhere quiet, is it? For you to not experience such. But again, the communication breakdown there, the reason for it is the noise coming from the vehicles. Next image. What can you say about it? It seems that we have here two guys talking. hmm And it seems that they have a neighbor who's enjoying his life or her life to the fullest, having their a video okay session with himself or herself. Then look at these two guys. They seem to be talking, but they do have different thoughts in mind. This one seems to be what? Dreaming of flying or thinking of an insect, while the other one is thinking of a watermelon or of a food. So that could be the reason for the communication breakdown between the two of them. They're not in the same boat. They're not riding in the same boat. They're not on the same page. That's why they couldn't understand each other aside from the noise coming from the video king or queen of in their neighborhood. Okay? The next we have the third image. Okay. So what could be the reason for the communication breakdown in the said photo in the given image? Okay. So what they have in mind? Mm-hmm. They are both what? They are both talking simultaneously and they seem talking in a loud voice. That's why you have there the illustration voicing out, showing to us how loud they are talking to each other and at the same time simultaneous talking. So in conversation, it is always what? It is always given that each cannot understand or a person can't understand another person if they will be talking at the same time. So it's a give and take process in communication. So that's the reason for the communication breakdown for for the third image. What is it? The elements involved in communication are important in the success or failure of this process. These very same elements, sender, message, receiver, feedback, etc., can pose a threat to the efficiency or effectiveness of the process. Communication breakdown may occur when problems in any of the elements involved arise. They become barriers to communication. Simply put, communication breakdown results when the intended message of the sender is not understood exactly by the receiver. Barriers to communication are present. Recognize the barriers or obstacles to effective communication is important in order to avoid communication breakdown. Here are some of the barriers that may cause communication failure. But before we go on with the communication barriers, let's understand what is said in this slide. Okay, so you know already what are the elements in communication. So what is being said there is that if one in the elements encounters a certain problem, then surely there will be communication breakdown. For example, all of a sudden the sender of the message who just gave a message to the receiver, then all of a sudden uh is no longer in state of talking or willingness of talking, as if all of a sudden he becomes quiet or she becomes quiet because of certain emotion, or maybe he or she remembers something and all of a sudden he or she stops. So that's what barrier to communication. So there it could lead to communication breakdown. Now the message, for example, the so-called communication breakdown will step in if, for example, the message that is expected to be delivered doesn't reach the receiver of it, or in the transmittal of the message there came a problem, that it was not written well, it was not jotted down well, and the message given is no longer the same with what was sent by the speaker. Just like in the game, the game, the one that you are usually playing, the pass the message. So the message. So if there will be a problem with the message, then you will have there the communication breakdown. Receiver. What could be the problem with the receiver? If the receiver, for example, has a problem with his or her hearing sense, then there could be communication breakdown. Then feedback. So the feedback, when are we going to have the communication problem there, the communication breakdown? If the feedback also is not aligned with what is expected by the previously sender, now receiver, it's not aligned with the idea. Okay, so there's the chance there, or there you will have communication breakdown, and there are more factors now affecting communication or leading to communication breakdown, affecting the communication itself, leading to the so-called communication breakdown. Okay, then next one here, it is said that what communication breakdown results when the intended message of the sender is not understood exactly by the receiver. So, if the message being sent is not understood clearly by the receiver, then meaning to say there's a communication problem leading to communication breakdown. Okay? So the communication will not proceed on what is expected or what is expected in it if there's a certain factor or barrier hindering it to proceed. Okay? Then, of course, for you to fully understand this so-called communication breakdown, so let's have them one at a time. Okay? Let's continue. In the next slides, we will be talking about barriers to communication. So why is it important for us to know the barriers to communication? Because knowing each will certainly lead us to have good communication with our fellow human beings, resulting to good relationship with them. So if we know the barriers of communication, then we will start to avoid committing such or being affected by each in our conversation with people. Okay? And if that happens, then the so-called communication breakdown will not step in. Okay? So let's find out now what are the barriers to communication. The first in the list is the so-called physical barriers. What are physical barriers? These are the natural or environmental conditions that act as a barrier in communication in sending the message from sender to receiver. Okay? So what are the examples? People talking too loud. We have noise from a construction site, loud sound of a karaoke, then blaring of jeepney horns. So those are just basic examples of physical barriers. Okay? So there are people who do not like dealing with or talking with someone who has loud voice because it hinders him or her understanding the message. If it's too loud, is it? That's why we frequently hear people saying, "Hi, where do you live? Are you from the mountains?" Wherein we are just talking next to each other, and then your voice is too loud. So you are being distracted by it, resulting to not understanding the message. Is it? Okay, the number two there, of course, a noisy environment leads to communication breakdown. Even how much you want to make yourself that focus listening to someone who's talking, then still it can be hindered or it can be uh affected by the noise that is heard in the surrounding. Okay? The number three, this one, the loud sound of a karaoke. That's why in our city nowadays, in Calamba City, we have the resolution order coming from the Public Order Safety Office that whenever it is school days, then it is not allowed to open video okay machine or sing or what or have there the loud noise coming from components because certainly those learners of the online distance learning will be affected. The learners will be distracted. Okay? Because there's communication happening between the teachers and the students during the online classes. So, if we have this loud noise, not just like karaoke, then definitely they will be leading to communication breakdown. Okay? Then the last one, of course, the blaring of jeepney horns. That's why lucky are those who are not living near national roads or highways. For certainly, na they are affected by the loud or blaring of of cars or vehicles horns. Okay? So again, physical barriers are the natural environmental condition that act as a barrier in communication in sending the message from sender to receiver. Okay? So thunder, no, the loud thunders, no, and other noise that we can hear from our surroundings are also under physical barriers. Okay? You look at the image. It seems that you have there a man who seems so relaxed standing on top of the mountain. A person who's not that sociable and just wanting to be alone. But do you know that that attitude is one of the so-called barriers to communication? How does it happen? Let's find out. We have the second barrier to communication, the psychological barriers. What are these? They are called as mental barriers. These refer to social and personal issues of a speaker towards communicating with others. What are the examples? It can be the so-called trauma. Two, shyness or lack of confidence. Three, depression. Four, fear or stage fright. Okay, let's take it one at a time. That so-called trauma could be what? Could be caused by a certain tragedy or an experience during childhood, or it can be during what period or age of a person for as long as he or she experience a trauma. Okay? For example, a person experience a very tragic thing, no? Wherein he was or she was asked that if you will be talking, then I'll be slashing your neck. Then if that statement is instilled in the mind of that person, then certainly that person will stop or avoid talking because he or she is thinking that such thing will be done on him or her. So that's an example of that so-called trauma. Okay? Number two, the shyness or lack of confidence. That's the typical thing among students who are not who are not that confident of themselves inside classroom. Wherein they are forgetting that what being so led to what? Led to low grades, is it? So the so-called shyness or lack of confidence, it's given. Okay, that's a psychological barrier. Then depression, of course, there are people who are whenever depressed just wanted to be alone and lock themselves in their room and do not want to talk with anyone or with anybody. It's kind of the same with what? Whenever you are broken-hearted, then you just want to be alone in your room and doesn't want to hear condoling words, consoling, is it consoling like that? Or what? Words of encouragement, motivational words from the people around him or her because of that depression that he or she is experiencing. Okay? The number four, the fear, then the stage fright. Okay? The fear of being questioned by people whenever he or she talks, for they will be commenting something wrong about the statement or whatever he or she will be saying, then he or she will be bashed. Is it? So that's under psychological barrier. The stage fright, wherein you are the speaker. You're chosen to speak about a certain cause or a certain topic. Then all of a sudden you cannot do so because you're trembling on stage. So it will not lead you to what? To go on with your speech. So that's what we call stage fright, or an example of a stage fright. So these so-called psychological barriers again leads to communication breakdown whenever you are experiencing any of those. But again, we are studying the so-called barriers to communication for communication breakdown not to happen. For we will be learning on how we are going to address these so-called barriers to communication so that again, the so-called communication breakdown will not be given space. Okay? So let's proceed. Have you ever experienced sitting in a room and then just making yourself that busy with a certain book or a gadget that you're using because you do not want to talk with your fellow students or people in the room because you feel afraid of doing so? So look at that image. It seems to be a good representation of that scenario. Okay? So that one is also under barriers to communication. How do we call it? It is called cultural barriers. So what are cultural barriers? They pertain to communication problems encountered by people regarding their intrinsic values, beliefs, and traditions in conflict with others. People's culture affect the way they communicate and relate to others. Okay? So, what are the examples? The different beliefs, the traditions and customs, the manners of dressing, and of course, the speaking. So, those are what examples of cultural barriers. For example, the different beliefs when it comes to religion. Sometimes we tend not to talk about our ideas of certain religion because we are thinking that they do have different beliefs when it comes to religion because you are not in the same group or you are not in the same um, religion. Okay? So it's an example of that different beliefs. It's kind of the same with what? Sometimes you do not want to talk with someone who's from another school. No, it makes you afraid dealing with that person because you think that what you are not the same because you came from different institutions. Okay, and of course the different beliefs no cultured in the so-called institutions. Okay, so still beliefs. No, because definitely the people from this institution are believing like this, having this set of beliefs, then also the same with this people coming from this institution. That's why you tend not to talk with each other. Next is the so-called traditions and customs. Okay, the so-called tradition and customs. So, and a good example of it is the what? Is the tradition of the Filipino people of having the longest Christmas season in the world. But can you talk about it? Dealing with those people who are not celebrating Christmas? Of course, you cannot. So that's what. That's a good example of the so-called communication barrier. Then the third one, the manners of dressing. The manners of dressing, yes. That's under cultural barriers. That what? You have this belief that you are not allowed to talk to this person because the person seems to be too regal, not too august, that you are what? You are not having the confidence to talk with that person. Okay? So as if the manner of dressing sets a demarcation line between people. Na? It's kind of the same with what? As if you do not want to talk with a beggar because you believe that this person will not understand you if ever you will be talking to him or her, is it? But of course, we do not judge people by their dress, okay? On how they look like. Na? So the last one is, of course, speaking, that speaking is under cultural barrier. Of course, the manner of speaking itself serves as a cultural, as a what? As barrier to communication. Okay, so those communication barriers under cultural barriers are what? Are again leading to communication breakdown. So if we are aware of this, then definitely the next time we talk to people and we are in such, then we will not be restraining ourselves to have conversation with them because we know that even though we have these things, then we can still communicate with them. Okay? So let's continue. Was there a moment in your life that you found it difficult to understand talking with the people around you because each of you spoke of different language? Have you? Okay. If it happened already in your lives, then that's another example of barriers to communication, and we call it linguistic barriers. So, what are linguistic barriers? They pertain conflicts with regard to language and word meanings. Because words carry denotative and connotative meanings, they can sometimes cause confusion and misunderstanding. Meaning of words and symbols are varied depending on culture. So, what are the examples of the so-called linguistic barriers? First is difference in language. Second is the accent and dialect. Three, use of jargon and slang. Four, speech defects or language impairments. So difference in language, of course, we have different languages. So just the same with what the Filipino people speak of English, Filipino, and many dialects. That even though we live in the Philippines alone, then we Filipinos cannot really understand each other. What more if we will be talking to people coming from other countries? So the so-called difference in language. The number two, accent and dialect. So it's kind of the same with that, but this one highlights the accent. It's the same with what? It's more understandable talking to Americans. In my case, I prefer talking to the Americans than the British people. Why? Or the English people? Because I can easily understand them. It's kind of the same with what? It's kind of the same with talking to people coming from coming from the Tagalog regions. Yes, from the Tagalog regions because the accent of their Filipino speaking is of course no understandable. Okay, but I have nothing against with those people who have the so-called regional accent because regional accent accordingly cannot be totally diminished or removed from a person. That eventually it occurs. Okay, so the accent, that's what under linguistic barriers. So accent and dialect. So the dialect of every region, of every group of people in our country, no, serves as barrier to communication. Okay, the use of jargon. No, that's why in senior high school you have the English for specific purpose like that, na studying the set of jargons of this certain field, no? Because every field has its own set of jargons, okay? Now that's why if I am a teacher, then I will be invited to conduct a talk among doctors. Then I have to what? I have to align uh, my speech with the jargons or words, technical terms used frequently by these doctors. Or maybe I am not. No, I am not the person who must talk in front of them because we are from different fields. Okay, so the use of jargons and of course the slang. Okay, that's why you have there the so-called the levels of language, the slang, the familiar, okay, then the formal. So knowing which one to be used, okay. Sometimes this slang word is not usable in a certain communication, that it hinders communication, leading to communication breakdown. The number four, the speech defects or language impairments. Okay, that what what does he or she mean? Is it really like this or like that? No, it's kind of the same with the what, with the PNF syndrome. And if ever you have that PNF syndrome, all you have to do is to practice or is to keep on reading words that begin with letter P and letter F, then eventually it will be corrected. So that's a good example of the so-called speech defect or language impairments. Okay? So again, these are the linguistic barriers that lead to communication breakdown. Okay. Hopefully, by now you are familiar with the so-called physical, psychological, cultural, and linguistic barriers. So, if you listened intently in the explanations and examples that I gave, definitely at this point you are fully aware of those so-called barriers to communication. But for you to deepen your knowledge about these so-called communication barriers, let's also study the similar idea of barrier to communication presented by Berderber way back 1991. He's able to classify noise into three kinds. According to him, noise can be classified to external, internal, and semantic. So let's take it one at a time. Let's have first the so-called external noises. So what are external noises? These are the sight, sound, and other stimuli that draw people's attention away from intended meaning. So if you can make connection with the so-called external noise with the first set of barriers to communication, now maybe by now you have it in mind that they are the same, or this is the same with the so-called physical noise. Let's see the examples. So we have number one, the noise from vehicles, singing at the neighborhood, the visual aids in front of the classroom, the dog barking, and the sound of an airplane. So which is new? Which is new? The visual aids in front of the classroom. So it's a noise also. It's an external noise that what? That drives the attention of people from the intended meaning of intended meaning in that communication that is happening. Okay? So again, the visual aids in front of the classroom. It's the same with the slide decks that cannot be read because their font sized, no, their point size are too small. Is it? So that's external noise. That is coming from the outside. Okay? It's from the outside. Of course, the dog barking, na, then the sound of an airplane. So they are also what comprehensible. They are comprehensible also under external noises. Okay. The second classification of noise, according to Berder is the so-called internal noises. What are internal noises? They are the thoughts and feelings that interfere with meaning. Meaning to say, whenever you encounter this, then the meaning of messages or the communication itself is being affected by this. So what are the examples of the so-called internal noises? We have the confrontation with a friend, fear of speaking in front of the class, and the racial prejudice. So after hearing the examples, you can make connection with what communication barrier coming from the first set of communication barriers. Which one? Okay, you got it correctly. The so-called psychological barriers. Is it? The psychological barriers, and the other one is from the is from what? Is it from linguistic? From linguistic barrier? Or also psychological, the psychological barrier. Okay, both psychological barriers. Okay, so confrontation with a friend. So why is it under internal noises? Because it's given that after you had a confrontation, a misunderstanding with your friend, then you are being bothered by it, and that moment that you are being bothered by it is what is is leading to communication breakdown, or as if no confrontation with a friend leads you to the thinking why you are fighting, why you are arguing with something wherein you are friends with each other. It makes you stop talking with that person as you think about these thoughts. No? And as you do so, you have the what? Interference with the meaning or with the communication itself. Okay? Leading to what? Communication breakdown. Then the fear of speaking in front of the class. I already explained that. Then the racial prejudice. Of course, this racial prejudice is under cultural barrier. It is an internal noise. Okay, as if it is stereotype already, or it is already embedded in our minds or in our hearts, that we have this existing prejudice that is happening, and it leads to communication breakdown. Is it? It serves as a barrier to communication, leading to communication breakdown, because you have that stereotype idea about this set of people and about yourself. So as you entertain this thought, then of course you cannot go on with what, with communication with them, or with communicating with them. Okay. So let's proceed to the last classification of noise according to Berderber. Semantic noises is the third classification of noises according to Berderber. So what do they mean? These are the alternate meanings aroused by a speaker's symbols. This idea means that a word may have another meaning in the minds of the students. This is affected by the language in which they grew and the culture in which they are exposed. So if you will be correlating it with a first set of communication barriers, we can associate it with the cultural barriers. Yes, the cultural barriers. Okay, so it's kind of the same with what? In the under the linguistic barrier, that a word may have a denotative or connotative meaning. If it's denotative meaning, then it's easy. Now there will be no issue with it, because whenever we say denotative meaning, that is the dictionary meaning of a word. Unlike the connotative meaning of a word, wherein this word may connote a different meaning to a person depending on his or her experiences, and it can be different from another person's understanding of that word, because he or she has another connotation for that word. Okay, so I'm just making connection with that line. This idea means that a word may have another meaning in the minds of the students, depending on where that person or where those students came from. Okay, so let's have better understanding of this. So let's have the examples. So number one, the so-called semantic noise is represented by incorrect grammar. So why it is called semantic noise? Because it's kind of the same with what, as we talk to people, then if that person portraying that he or she is kind of rich, then you are amazed by how he or she looks like because of the manner of dressing. Then all of a sudden, no, you are listening to that person's talking to you, then committed a fault or an error in grammar, then all of a sudden your attention is directed to something, thinking that he's making or her making himself herself sounding rich, but actually he or she is not that good in grammar. So that thought, the existence, now as that thought steps in, then it leads to communication breakdown. Okay, that's why semantic. You're making connection. Okay, you're making connection with what you know and what you hear from others. So incorrect grammar, you're questioning the grammar of that person, because according to your knowledge, now the manner of that person way of speaking, using words into sentences or paragraphs are incorrect is incorrect. So that's what you call incorrect grammar. That's why incorrect grammar is under semantic noise. Next, the using excessive technical jargon. So the using of excessive technical jargon uh, is under semantic noise, in the sense that if you're making use of it that much, no, it's kind of the same with what you're using the scientific terms for these terms, that can be said in basic in much comprehensible words, then you see you have the what? Semantic noise, the occurrence of semantic noise, because your listener is trying, now is trying to understand or to make connection. What do those words mean? Is it? That's why it's under semantic noises. Na, the so-called using excessive technical jargon. It makes your listeners dig in on what they know for them to cope with the ideas that you are presenting to them. So doing so leads to communication breakdown. Okay, that's why it's a barrier to communication. Then the last one under it is the using idiomatic expressions. Okay, it's under semantic noises because it's the same with the example. Do not let the cat out of the bag. If I'm the one who's going to hear that idiomatic expression, do not let the cat out of the bag, then I might say I don't have a cat in my bag. What are you saying? Is it? So that's why it's under semantic noise. It's kind of the same with what? Break a leg. There's a group of young teens who are about to join a contest. Then you will be saying break a leg, and they do not know about the idiomatic expression. What will happen? They might get angry on you. Is it? So it leads to, again, communication breakdown. So those three, incorrect grammar, using excessive technical jargon, using idiomatic expressions, are all under the so-called semantic noises, under the classification of Berdever, three kinds of noises: external, internal, and semantic noises. Okay, thank you for listening. I hope by now you know very well about communication barriers. After learning more about the communication barriers, let us now proceed to what's more. Activity 1, directions. Identify the kind of communication barrier exemplified by each description. Tell whether it is physiological or the so-called physical, psychological, cultural, or linguistic barrier. You write your answer on a separate sheet of paper. Of course, you deal with your Google form link. So we have here lack of confidence, connotative and denotative meaning, loud party, different races, poor lighting, lack of interest and attention, different views and opinions, using idiomatic expressions, informal information overload, feel frustrated. Okay, so the lack of confidence is under what? The psychological. The connotative and denotative meaning is under linguistic barrier. The loud party is also physiological. The different races, cultural. The poor lighting is physiological. The lack of interest and attention, that is what? Under psychological. The different views and opinions, cultural, using idiomatic expressions under linguistic. Then information overload under linguistic also. Okay. Then the last one, feel frustrated, is under psychological barrier. So let's continue. Still under what's more, activity 2, directions. Explain why there is communication breakdown on the given situations. Again, write your answers on a separate sheet of paper. You visit again your Google Classroom and check for the Google Form link. Okay, number one. Jay and Michelle started talking about their plans on Christmas vacation when their classmate Moy interrupted them. So let us explain why there is communication breakdown on the first situation. You have there what kind of communication barrier? The physical communication barrier or the external noise? Because you have there the communication happening between Michelle and Jay, then all of a sudden the classmate Moy interrupted them. Number two, Mama, I will buy this cake for you. I am very sure that you will like its taste. It's from our favorite cake store. So it's what? It's under physical barrier or external noise. Because what? The child doesn't give the mother the chance to talk or look at the structure of the sentence. You have there the exclamation point saying that it is being delivered in a what? In a loud or excited manner. Okay? Number three, you spent the night thinking and analyzing why a student from another class talked to you on your way home. So, what's the communication barrier here? It is the psychological barrier or the internal noise, is it? Wherein you allowed yourself to think about why that classmate of yours talked to you on your way home. Why? Wherein it did not make you sleep that good because you kept on thinking about it. So that is psychological barrier. You have there the existence of that internal noise. Then number four, Libby encounters a participant who is very eager to share with others her views and opinions. She does this without asking permission. So that is what? You have there what? Too much noise coming from the outside. So external noise or under physical barrier. The number five. In some Asian countries, direct eye contact is considered disrespectful and rude. In others, it is a must. So that is what you have there the existence of beliefs coming from or customs, traditions rather, coming from other Asian countries or coming from countries. So it's under cultural barrier, is it? Or the so-called semantic barrier, okay? So cultural because you're pertaining to the customs and traditions of Asian countries that are not the same or uniform among all. Okay. So we're done with activity 2. What's more? Let us have what I have learned. Directions, explain your understanding on the given questions. Write your answer on the separate sheet of paper. What is communication breakdown? What are the barriers to communication? Why does breakdown of communication occur? Okay, you deal with it in your Google form link. What I can do, interview some people and ask them about a past communication breakdown they have experienced and what was its cause. 1.1. Complete the table by answering the following questions. Who were the persons involved? What was the situation? When did the communication breakdown happen? What were the barriers to communication? What happened due to the communication breakdown? Identify 1.2. Identify the cause of the communication breakdown. An example is provided for you. Persons involved, Aling Celia and Reza, mother and daughter. Situation, Aling Celia asked Reza to wash the dishes. Time of communication, when Reza was watching her favorite anime series. Barriers to communication, physiological barrier. Result, Aling Celia was upset because Reza did not do as told. What was the cause of communication breakdown? Reza's lack of attention caused the communication breakdown. So the thing here is that you must be able to recognize the communication breakdown that occurs in a communication so that you can patch it or you can do something about it the next time. Or at least you know these communication barriers and you will be avoiding yourselves uh, committing those so that you will not experience having a good communication then all of a sudden you have the communication breakdown that it will be making the conversation no longer healthy, okay? Or for the communication not to pursue. Mhm. Let us proceed to the additional activities. Choose between offline activity or online activity. Okay, definitely those who are online will be dealing with the online activity. But for you to know what's that offline activity, you write a letter to your teacher about your personal learning on communication breakdown. Include in your letter how this lesson can be useful in your daily life, particularly at home, in school, and in the community. Then on the next slide, you consider the rubric for this offline activity. Still under additional activities. So this one is for the online learners, okay? Those who chose the online learning. So this is the so-called online activity of yours. So create a 5-minute blog about communication breakdown. Be sure that definition and explanation why there is communication breakdown are evident in the video. Send to your teacher, send it to me, the link of your presentation. For you to be guided doing your 5-minute blog, have this rubric in mind. So criteria, content, organization. So excellent, very good, good, poor, and needs improvement. So whenever the content is good, you will be given 5 points. So it must be what? Presenting accurate, complete, and well-explained ideas related to the topic. Organization, when are you going to get the 5 points? It is the information, video, pictures, and other content are very well organized, and coherence and cohesion are very evident. So let's proceed to the next slide for you to know the last criterion for the rubric on your 5-minute blog. Dealing with your 5-minute blog, do not forget about technicality. So you will get 5 points if your visuals are well framed and audio or sound quality is excellent and suitable throughout. So all in all, you can get 15 points for this activity. Thank you for listening. Hopefully, you have learned a lot about communication barriers. Good day and God bless us all.